They laughed. From high above the English countryside, German reconnaissance pilots radioed back to Berlin, amused. "The British are desperate," one said. "They're building toy airfields out of wood." On their grainy photographs, the evidence seemed comical. Hangars shaped from plywood, runways painted on grass, and rows of clumsy fake aircraft that never moved. To the Luftwaffe, it looked like a bad joke. But the joke, as it turned out, was on them. Because beneath those wooden wings and painted runways was one of the most ingenious operations of the Second World War. A war not of firepower, but of illusion. In 1940, as Nazi Germany dominated Europe, the skies over Britain became the front line. The Royal Air Force was outnumbered 3-1, its airfields pounded daily by German bombers. Every real runway destroyed meant fewer planes, fewer pilots, and one step closer to invasion. Britain needed to protect its air force, but it couldn't build more planes fast enough, so it decided to build lies instead. The plan was as daring as it was strange: create entire fake air bases to fool German pilots into bombing the wrong places. They were called Q sites, decoy installations designed to mimic the real thing. The Q stood for quagmire, a nod to their purpose, to bog down the enemy in confusion. The idea came from a mix of military necessity and artistic brilliance. Britain's camouflage division included not only soldiers but stage designers, painters, and illusionists, men who had once built scenery for London theaters now drafted into the war. Where others saw destruction, they saw opportunity. They studied how German bombers identified targets, the layout of hangars, the glint of runways, the spacing of lights. Then they recreated them with uncanny precision. From the air, it was perfect. Lights marking runways, shadows falling just right, wooden aircraft parked neatly in rows. But up close, it was a surreal stage set. Aircraft made of planks and canvas, fuel depots built from oil drums and mud, control towers painted onto plywood walls. At night, the deception became even more convincing. When radar operators reported incoming raids, the Q site crews rushed into action. They lit fake runway lamps and ignited controlled fires to mimic bomb hits, guiding German bombers away from real bases and toward empty fields. The Luftwaffe's bombs fell, exploding harmlessly in the darkness, and when dawn came, the fake airfields still stood, smoldering, victorious in their silence. The German pilots refused to believe it. They had bombed what looked like real targets, yet British fighters kept coming. Soon their intelligence officers began noticing something strange. The same airfields they claimed to have destroyed were still operational the next day. The British, it seemed, had mastered a new kind of warfare, one that turned art into armor. It was a war fought with wood, light, and imagination. A shadow war where paintbrushes, outwitted bombs, and stagecraft saved lives. And as the British deception network expanded, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning. Soon the Germans who once mocked the toy airfields would be firing at ghosts, wooden planes that could not die, built by men who refused to surrender to reality. The world's first great war of illusion had begun. The idea was born not in a general's office, but in a cluttered workshop filled with sawdust, blueprints, and cigarette smoke. In the summer of 1940, as German bombers darkened the skies over Britain, engineers and artists gathered in secret rooms to design something that didn't exist: airfields that would never fly a plane, hangars that would never hold an aircraft, and lights that would lead only to shadows. The British government called it the Q-Site program. It began as an experiment, a handful of false runways scattered across southern England, each meant to draw enemy fire away from real RAF bases. The concept came from Colonel John Turner, a quietly brilliant officer of the Royal Engineers who had seen how easily German pilots could be deceived by appearances. Turner believed that if the Luftwaffe could be made to waste its bombs, Britain might survive long enough to fight back. his allies were not ordinary soldiers. He recruited men from unexpected places: theaters, film studios, architecture firms, and art schools. Stage designers who had once painted city skylines for the West End now studied the real skies, learning how to trick enemy pilots with perspective and light. Sculptors built life-sized planes from canvas and wire. Electricians wired false landing lights to flicker just like the real thing. To the untrained eye, the phantom airfields looked crude. From the ground they were obvious fakes: wooden Spitfires, painted fuel tanks, hangars made from tarpaulin. But from 1,000 meters up, through the shaking view of a bomber's periscope, they looked perfect. And that was all that mattered. The first decoy field went operational near Sheffield, a vital industrial target. Within days, the Luftwaffe struck. German bombers released their payloads on what they believed was an RAF installation. The real base, just miles away, remained untouched. The British engineers who built the decoy watched the explosions from afar, terrified and exhilarated. The illusion had worked. Soon, dozens of phantom airfields appeared across the countryside. Some were elaborate, with fake taxiways and dummy planes that could be rearranged to mimic daily operations. Others were simple: a few painted lines and a field of plywood shapes. They became known by their code names: Starfish sites for decoys simulating burning cities, QF sites for fuel depots, QG sites for factories. Each one was a masterpiece of deception. The enemy never suspected how low-tech the trick really was. The British had discovered that imagination was cheaper than armor. A few truckloads of wood and a handful of light bulbs could protect an airbase worth millions. The Luftwaffe, with all its might, could be made to bomb an empty pasture. Still, the work was dangerous. The crews who manned the decoys had to operate during air raids, turning on lights or setting controlled fires to draw bombs away from real cities. They were unarmed, often working in the open, and if discovered, would have been executed as spies. Yet they did it night after night, guided only by the faith that illusion could save reality. By late 1940, Britain had built over 500 decoy sites, a hidden network of ghosts that stretched from Scotland to the Channel. Every fake field that drew fire meant a real one spared, every wooden plane a life potentially saved. In a war defined by destruction, the British had created something extraordinary: a defense made of lies and light. And while the German command still laughed at the reports of wooden airbases, those who flew over them began to wonder if the laughter might be hiding fear. By 1941, the wooden war had become an art form. Britain's defense was no longer built only in factories and hangars, but in studios, theaters, and design schools. The people crafting the nation's survival were not soldiers in uniform. They were artists, engineers, and dreamers, fighting with brushes, carpentry tools, and tricks of the light. The Ministry of Home Security officially referred to them as the Camouflage Directorate. Unofficially, soldiers called them the Magicians. They were led by men like Basil Spence, a young architect who would one day design Coventry Cathedral, and Shepherd Shep Payne, a stage designer turned military visionary. Their mission was clear: to make the unreal look utterly real, and to make the enemy believe it. They studied the psychology of sight, how a pilot racing through clouds at 300 miles per hour perceived the earth below, how the human brain recognized patterns, runways, hangars, fuel tanks, even when they weren't there. From that research, they built illusions that fooled the eye, the camera, and the mind. A real airfield had movement, shadows, light, and geometry, so they copied it all. They built hangars from wooden frames covered in tarpaulin, painting shadows on the walls to make them appear three-dimensional. They laid strips of crushed limestone to imitate concrete runways and used reflective paint to make oil spills glisten in the sunlight. Dummy planes, nicknamed Hurricanes in plywood, were designed in flat sections so they could be moved easily, even rearranged daily to mimic an operational base. From above, it was flawless. The Luftwaffe's aerial reconnaissance analysts logged these installations as real RAF stations, complete with activity. The deception was so detailed that some British pilots accidentally tried to land on them. But illusion was more than just design, it was theater. The crews running the Q sites had to perform their airfields. At dusk, they rolled fake trucks across the grass to kick up dust. They turned runway lights on and off in deliberate patterns, mimicking takeoff operations. When German bombers approached, they lit controlled fires, using diesel and straw soaked in oil to create the illusion of a base already hit. The trick was cruel and brilliant. Enemy pilots, seeing flames, believed their bombs were striking home and moved on, sparing real targets nearby. This was no small show. Hundreds of these decoy sites stretched across the countryside, a hidden, flickering constellation of false hope. The Germans called them Scheinanlagen, sham installations. But even that grudging name hinted at a growing respect for their effectiveness. The men who built them never received glory. Their successes were secret, their work classified. They risked their lives without medals or headlines. When bombs fell near their positions, they huddled in trenches, praying their wooden world would hold. Some of them had once painted backdrops for Shakespeare plays in London's West End. Now they painted shadows for survival. They understood something the enemy didn't, that war could be fought not only with steel but with imagination. And as their illusions spread, Britain's skies began to change. Every night, German pilots flew over fields that shimmered with false life. Every morning, more real airbases survived untouched. It was, as one RAF officer would later say, the greatest performance ever staged, and the audience never knew they'd been fooled. The masters of illusion had turned deception into defense, and soon their wooden ghosts would begin to fight back. At first, the Germans thought it was hilarious. When Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilots returned from their missions over Britain in late 1940, their photographs showed something that made even hardened officers chuckle. Rows of crooked aircraft sitting motionless on fields, painted runways that ended in grass, hangars that cast no shadows. The English, one pilot reported, are playing at war with wooden toys. Berlin laughed. The reports of these Q sites, as the British called them, circulated through intelligence channels and even reached the propaganda ministry. The Nazis saw them as proof of Britain's desperation, another sign that the so-called island fortress was collapsing under pressure. The German newspapers mocked the RAF for hiding behind stage props. Goebbels' own ministry reportedly called the idea a comedy of sawdust and paint. The Luftwaffe, proud and confident, had little reason to doubt their superiority. Their bombers roared nightly across the channel, dropping thousands of tons of explosives on Britain. They destroyed factories, docks, and cities, but strangely not enough airfields. It puzzled them. Reconnaissance confirmed hits, yet the RAF continued to fight. The British squadrons never seemed to run out of planes. In reality, the destroyed targets were often nothing more than illusions. The Luftwaffe's bombs were falling on empty pastures, fields lit by fake runways and populated by wooden aircraft. The Germans were wasting ammunition, fuel, and morale attacking ghosts. But they didn't know that yet. Inside the Camouflage Directorate, the British deceivers followed every raid with quiet satisfaction. They analyzed where the bombs fell and adjusted their illusions accordingly. If they hit it once, one engineer said, "We build it again. It's cheaper than a runway." Soon something unexpected began to happen. Reports from the front hinted that German pilots were starting to doubt their own eyes. A few claimed that some airfields reappeared days after being destroyed. Others complained about phantom targets that looked real but vanished when they approached. The laughter in Berlin grew uneasy. By the winter of 1941, the humor had turned to embarrassment. Luftwaffe reconnaissance officers began to realize how convincingly they had been fooled. In one case, pilots attacked what they thought was an RAF base near the Midlands, only to discover later that the bombs had landed in an open field of turnips. Meanwhile, the British kept refining their craft. They built more decoys, bigger and smarter. Runway lights were synchronized with radar reports, fake fires were triggered by real explosions, and wooden aircraft were replaced with rubber and wire models that shimmered like metal under moonlight. The deception became so effective that, even after the war, Luftwaffe veterans would recall their frustration. One pilot later admitted, "We thought we were striking the heart of England. In truth, we were bombing her shadows." But the greatest irony was yet to come, because soon the same German pilots who laughed at Britain's wooden toys would begin to aim their guns at them and miss. The stage was set for one of the strangest and most brilliant reversals of the war. The night the hunters fired on ghosts and the laughter died for good. The night sky over southern England glowed red, not from battle but from performance. It was 1941, and across the countryside, hundreds of secret crews were preparing for another act in the War of Illusion. These were the men of the Q sites, the phantom airfields built to deceive the Luftwaffe. When the sirens wailed, they didn't run for cover. They ran toward the danger, ready to light up their wooden world. In the distance, the low drone of bombers rolled across the clouds. The Germans were coming again. From their cockpits, they saw what looked like a real airfield below, glowing runway lights, faint reflections of aircraft wings, and small fires flickering from earlier hits. The deception crews had timed it perfectly. The Germans dove lower, lining up their bombing runs, but the airfield was nothing but a stage. The planes were wooden shells, the lights powered by generators hidden under haystacks, the fires controlled blazes fed with oil and straw. When the bombs fell, they tore through empty fields. No pilots died, no hangars burned, no fuel exploded, only the illusion. One engineer later wrote, "It was theater, only the audience carried bombs." These men, working in near total darkness, were some of the unsung heroes of Britain's defense. Their job was unimaginably dangerous. They couldn't turn on the lights until the bombers were nearly overhead, too early, and the Germans might realize the trap, too late, and the real airfields might take the hit. Sometimes they had only minutes to act. They called it the Wooden War. Each night the actors, electricians, mechanics, and artists turned soldiers, took their positions. They arranged dummy aircraft, adjusted painted shadows, and stood ready by the switch panels that controlled the fake airfield's lights. When radar stations reported incoming bombers, the order went out. Stage on. A hum of electricity, a flicker of lamps, and the illusion came alive. The Germans were convinced. The Luftwaffe, flying at night and guided only by the faint glow of ground lights, often couldn't tell real from fake. They dropped their bombs by sight and instinct, relying on patterns and flashes. And so, again and again, they targeted the decoys. At one site in Somerset, over 70 bombs fell in a single night. None hit the real RAF base nearby. The next morning, the crew walked through craters and splintered wood, laughing through exhaustion. "Every hole here," one of them said, "is a man still alive somewhere else." But the most legendary moment of the Wooden War came months later, a story whispered through Allied mess halls and later repeated by historians with a smile. After one successful decoy raid, British engineers found something odd among the wreckage: small wooden bombs dropped on their fake airfield. It was said that a German pilot, realizing he'd been duped, had delivered a sarcastic reply, a payload of mock ordnance carved from timber engraved with the words "wood for wood." Whether true or myth, it captured the strange humor that had developed between deceiver and deceived. Even in total war, irony had survived. By 1942, more than 600 Q sites dotted Britain, a glowing network of illusion that shielded real cities and air bases from destruction. Thousands of tons of enemy bombs fell harmlessly into empty fields, their explosions lighting up nothing but lies. The wooden war was working. The Luftwaffe's confidence faltered, their intelligence grew uncertain, and their resources drained into the dark. What had begun as a desperate improvisation had become one of Britain's greatest invisible victories, a war won not by firepower, but by imagination. The winter of 1942 was bitter, but the illusion war burned brighter than ever. Each week, new Q sites came online, their fake runways glimmering faintly under the moon, their wooden aircraft gleaming like ghosts in the frost. By now, the Luftwaffe knew about the decoy program. They had heard the rumors, even seen the wreckage of their own mistakes, but disbelief is a powerful thing, and pride even more so. The German Air Command couldn't accept that they, the masters of Blitzkrieg, had been outwitted by carpenters and stagehands, and so the bombers kept coming. From the air, Britain was a patchwork of fire and light, every flicker a potential target. German pilots relied on instinct, speed, and the briefest glimpses through the haze. To them, a lit runway was a lit runway. Real or fake didn't matter. They had seconds to decide, and the British deception artists made sure those seconds were enough. One of the most striking successes came on a frigid night near Norfolk, where a group of Royal Engineers maintained a decoy base known as Q Site 4A. It had been built to mimic an RAF bomber command station nearby, complete with fake hangars, mock fuel dumps, and a field of perfectly crafted wooden Wellingtons. When the Luftwaffe's Pathfinders arrived, they dropped flares over the decoy. Not the real base. The illumination lit up the entire false airfield, revealing exactly what the Germans wanted to see. A squadron of Heinkel swooped in, releasing tons of ordnance. The bombs cratered the frozen ground, tearing apart plywood planes and splintering wooden hangars. The real RAF base just 10 miles away remained untouched. By dawn, the engineers returned to survey the damage. One of them, Corporal Thomas Webb, wrote in his journal, "It's the oddest sight, destruction that feels like creation. Every wrecked dummy means something real still stands." But the legend that followed, the story that would become part of wartime folklore, began not with the British, but with the enemy. Weeks after that attack, a small Royal Engineer team discovered something unusual at another decoy site in Kent. Among the usual shrapnel and splintered wood were several wooden replicas of bombs, carefully carved and painted. Each bore a small, neat German stencil. Holzbomben, wooden bombs. The message was unmistakable. We know what you're doing, and we salute it. To this day, historians debate the truth of that tale. Some claim it never happened. Others insist eyewitnesses saw the mock ordnance with their own eyes. But whether myth or reality, it captured the strange respect that had developed between two enemies locked in a battle of wits. By then, the Luftwaffe had begun to lose faith in its intelligence. Aerial photos showed destroyed airfields that miraculously reappeared days later. Reports contradicted each other. Even the German High Command began to suspect that their own pilots could no longer tell real targets from fake ones. The hunters had been turned into the hunted, not by guns but by illusions. Behind the scenes, British officials marveled at the efficiency of the deception. For every bomb dropped on a Q site, a real base was spared. For every plane that strafed a wooden decoy, a squadron survived to fight another day. And though no medals were awarded, the engineers and artists who manned these ghost fields knew what they'd achieved. They had taken one of the deadliest weapons of the war, precision bombing, and blunted it with nothing more than light, paint, and imagination. The laughter in Berlin had gone silent. The wooden war was no longer a joke, it was victory by illusion. By 1943, Britain's shadow war had become legend, even if most of the world didn't yet know it. Word of the phantom airfields, The wooden Spitfires and the mysterious Q sites reached Washington through classified reports. What the Americans read sounded unbelievable. Artists, architects, and electricians tricking one of the world's most advanced air forces into bombing empty fields. But disbelief turned to admiration, and then to imitation. When the United States entered the war, it brought unmatched industry, energy, and optimism. What it lacked was subtlety, and the British had that in spades. The collaboration began quietly as RAF officers shared their camouflage techniques with American engineers. Soon, US commanders realized that deception could be as vital as firepower. America wasn't just joining the fight, it was joining the art of war. The result was one of the most creative military units in history, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army. Formed in 1944 under the command of Colonel Harry Reeder, this secret US unit brought together an unlikely army of artists, designers, and sound engineers, many recruited from advertising agencies, art schools, and Hollywood film sets. Their mission was the same one Britain had pioneered: use illusion to confuse, divert, and protect. Only now the battlefield was Europe itself. The Ghost Army built upon British innovations, taking them to astonishing new levels. Using inflatable tanks, rubber jeeps, and wooden artillery, they created entire phantom divisions that fooled German reconnaissance into thinking Allied forces were massing in one location while the real armies moved elsewhere. Massive loudspeakers blasted recordings of tank engines, marching boots, and shouted orders. Dummy airfields and fake depots appeared overnight, lit and arranged with the same care the British had given their decoys years earlier. And it worked. In the months leading up to D-Day, German intelligence grew obsessed with a supposed invasion force gathering in southeast England. They saw rows of vehicles, stacks of supplies, even aircraft parked along coastal roads. Reconnaissance planes photographed the evidence, all perfectly visible, all perfectly fake. The Germans concluded that the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The deception saved thousands of lives. It was the ultimate evolution of Britain's wooden war, a masterpiece of misdirection that changed the course of the conflict. Behind every illusion was the same blend of courage and creativity. Soldiers posed as radio operators, sending fake transmissions. Painters applied mud and tar to create the illusion of tank tracks. Engineers positioned inflatable vehicles at precise angles to cast convincing shadows under reconnaissance light. Every detail mattered, because a shadow could mean survival. When British officers visited the American camps, they were astonished. "You've outdone us," one said. "Ours were made of wood, yours move." The partnership between Britain's decoy designers and America's Ghost Army became one of the most extraordinary collaborations of the war, a fusion of art and strategy that confused an empire. By 1945, deception had evolved from an emergency tactic into a weapon of precision. It no longer just saved airfields, it won battles. The Allies had learned the ultimate lesson from the Wooden War, that imagination, properly aimed, could shape history just as powerfully as any bomb or bullet. And when the war finally ended, the men who had built those illusions, in Britain, in France, in the fields of Europe, quietly packed up their brushes, their blueprints, and their secrets. The world would never know their names, but their art had already changed the outcome of the greatest war in history. When peace finally came in 1945, the fake runways went dark for the last time. Across the British countryside, fields once lined with wooden Spitfires and painted hangars stood silent. Grass grew over the mock taxiways, the decoy lights were dismantled, and the men who had built illusions returned to ordinary lives. Farmers reclaimed the land, never knowing that for a few desperate years those pastures had fooled the mightiest air force on Earth. The war of deception was over, but its legacy had only begun. For years, the Q sites and their crews remained secret, hidden behind official silence. Even those who served in them rarely spoke of what they'd done. Their operations had been classified under the Official Secrets Act, and the world had moved on, eager to rebuild. But inside military circles, the lessons of the Wooden War were already reshaping the future. Historians would later uncover the truth. Between 1940 and 1944, Britain built more than 600 decoy installations, false airfields, cities, factories, and fuel depots. They absorbed thousands of tons of German bombs that might otherwise have flattened London, Manchester, and dozens of real RAF bases. Some estimates suggest that these illusions saved tens of thousands of lives. In the ruins of post-war Germany, captured Luftwaffe pilots spoke with disbelief about the scale of the deception. "We bombed them every night," one said, "and yet they never ran out of airfields. It was impossible." The admission was more than a confession. It was a kind of tribute. The hunters had come to respect the magicians who had beaten them without firing a shot. For Britain, the Q sites became a quiet symbol of something deeper, not just cleverness, but defiance. The same creativity that fueled Shakespeare's theatre and Turner's paintings had, in the nation's darkest hour, become a weapon of survival. It proved that intellect could stand against brute force, that imagination could be a shield as strong as steel. In time, the techniques pioneered by Britain's camouflage artists would inspire militaries worldwide. The United States' Ghost Army carried the torch in Europe, mastering the same blend of illusion and strategy. Decades later, during the Cold War and beyond, the same principles, camouflage, deception, psychological warfare, remained at the heart of modern defense. The tools had changed, but the philosophy endured. Control what the enemy sees, and you control the battle. Today, faint traces of the old Q sites can still be found, fragments of tarmac, odd patterns in satellite photos, or strange mounds where fake runways once stood. To most, they're curiosities, but to those who know their story, they are monuments to human ingenuity. The people who built them never saw themselves as heroes. They were engineers, artists, carpenters, and dreamers. Men and women who believed that survival required more than courage. It required imagination. One of the last surviving Q-site operators once said in an interview, "We fought the war with wood, wire, and wit, and somehow that was enough." He was right. In the end, the wooden airfields of Britain stood as more than just decoys. They were symbols of resistance, proof that even in a world drowning in destruction, creation could still win. And long after the bombers were gone and the laughter from Berlin had faded, the ghosts of those wooden planes still lingered. Silent, steadfast reminders that the sharpest weapon in war is often the human mind.